With its powerful pharaohs, countless gods, and breathtaking art, it's easy to imagine that ancient Egypt was always strong, stable, and prosperous. But that image hides a much harsher reality. There were periods marked by conflict, internal division, hunger, and a looming sense of disaster. And the only way this civilization endured was through resilience and through exceptionally strong leadership. This is Sesostris III, a ruler who governed Egypt nearly 4,000 years ago. He appears powerful and athletic, everything a pharaoh was expected to be. But look closely at his face. His stern, heavy expression has long been interpreted as a reflection of a harsh, uncompromising reign. His large ears, some believe, symbolized his ability to hear any whisper of rebellion. Sesostris represents how Egypt's rulers governed during times of instability. He controlled threats through chains of military fortresses and through the use of magical curses. This marked a turning point in Egypt's story, an age ruled not just by armies, but by fear and suspicion. And Egypt's darkest chapters now threaten to tear its entire civilization apart. I've already explored how Egypt's ancient culture first emerged thousands of years earlier, shaped by the Nile, enriched by a fertile landscape, and unified by a complex belief system. But in this episode, we'll see how the immense confidence of the Pyramid Age could not last forever. A devastating dark age pushed this civilization to the very edge of collapse. Make no mistake, this is a land of the dead, and we are surrounded by them. These were times of famine, civil war, and chaos. Kings were reduced to a shadow of their former authority, their power diminished to almost nothing. Yet from this collapse came one of the greatest revivals in ancient history. Egypt would rise again stronger and wealthier than ever before. Welcome to Saqqara, the birthplace of Egypt's great Pyramid Age. But among its triumphs lies evidence of a much darker and lesser-known story: Egypt's descent into chaos. The height of the Old Kingdom was marked by the construction of the Great Pyramid at Giza. Just 200 years later, King Unas built his causeway. It may not look like much today, but it was the centerpiece of Unas's pyramid complex. This 750-meter-long causeway symbolically linked the worlds of life and death. It stretched from the Nile Valley, climbed the desert plateau, and ended at the foot of Unas's pyramid. It would have carried his funeral procession, while also channeling the life-giving energy of the Nile up to the necropolis of Saqqara. A narrow opening in the roof once allowed light to filter in. But what's most remarkable is that this causeway served a single purpose: the king's final journey. Carved into its walls are scenes that reveal both sides of existence: order and chaos. At first, the reliefs show an idealized Egypt, a land of abundance. We see familiar temple and funerary scenes: fruit, vegetables, grain, meat, fish, the overwhelming richness of Egypt's natural world. All of this prosperity was believed to flow from the king himself, the provider of bounty and the intermediary between humans and gods. But further along the causeway, something far more unsettling appears. A disturbing image emerges, the opposite of abundance. So unusual is this scene that it's now displayed in the Saqqara Museum. It stands as one of the most haunting and revealing works of ancient Egyptian art. Here, chaos takes form. 2 rows of famine victims appear, emaciated, collapsing, barely alive. Their suffering is unmistakable. These figures are believed to represent Bedouins living on Egypt's desert fringes. The message is chilling. Suffering and chaos exist at the edges of Egypt, and they are drawing closer to the Nile Valley. Egypt was beginning to realize that disorder was not distant. It was approaching. This was Egypt confronting hardship for the first time. Such raw realism had rarely been shown before. Chaos wasn't depicted as a distant magical force among the gods. It was shown as real people in pain. This was reality. Through images like these, the Egyptians expressed their fears to the gods, begging them to hold chaos at bay. But instead, these starving figures proved to be an ominous warning. Until this point, Egypt's prosperity depended on a single source, the Nile. Its annual floods fertilized the land, allowing agriculture and life itself to thrive. This cycle was the foundation of Egypt's worldview and its sense of eternal order. But now, that lifeline was beginning to fail. Evidence shows that at the end of the 3rd millennium BC, Nile flood levels dropped sharply. The very force that sustained Egypt was fading. The Egyptians believed their gods were abandoning them. Ancient texts from the following century describe suffering, starvation, and even cannibalism. For generations, Egyptian society had rested on faith in the divine power of the king. Without that belief, the Pyramid Age could never have existed. But in this moment of crisis, the king appeared helpless before nature's wrath. This tension reached its peak under a ruler long past his prime. Said to have lived to nearly 100 years old, he was the longest reigning king in Egyptian history, Pepi II. And this space once served as a ceremonial running track, a place where Pepi was expected to demonstrate physical strength and vitality to prove his worth as ruler. Traditionally, when a pharaoh reached 30 years on the throne, they were required to carry out the Jubilee rituals, and at the heart of these ceremonies was the sacred Jubilee Run. The king had to race 4 full laps around this course as ruler of the north, and then another 4 laps as ruler of the south. It was the ultimate public demonstration of strength, vitality, and legitimacy, proof that the pharaoh was physically and spiritually fit to govern all of Egypt. This spectacle made it unmistakably clear who held power over the land. But this is where Pepi's advancing age would ultimately betray him. When a pharaoh was young and strong, the Jubilee would have been a triumphant celebration. For Pepi, however, now in his 90s, it became painfully obvious that the pharaoh was not a living god after all. And that realization struck at the very core of what it meant to be king. If the ruler was clearly mortal, no different from his subjects, then any natural disaster could be blamed on his failure. A king who could not control nature could not truly be divine. This deadly combination, a visibly weakened pharaoh and repeated harvest failures, triggered a rapid decline. For the first time, ancient Egypt was facing a full-scale political crisis. The power and divine authority of the pharaoh, once the unshakable foundation of the Pyramid Age, had evaporated. Everything that had held Egyptian society together began to unravel, and Egypt slid into a dark age. During this period of mounting uncertainty, when faith in both the monarchy and the state religion collapsed, Egyptians increasingly turned to magic for protection and control. This object is deeply unsettling. It's an ancient Egyptian mask, nearly 4,000 years old. It's made from linen coated with a thin layer of plaster, then painted mostly black, with details highlighted in color. Egyptians are famous for their elaborate preparations for the afterlife. Death masks placed over mummies recreated the faces of the dead so they could be recognized by the gods. But this mask is different. This one was meant to be worn by the living. We know that because of the distinct eye holes cut into it, allowing the wearer to see. When secured to the face and tied at the back of the head, it would have transformed the person wearing it into something else entirely. Traces of pigment on the linen suggest it helped the wearer embody a supernatural or magical being. Whoever wore this mask went to great lengths to alter their appearance, attempting to tap into hidden divine forces and influence their world. It's as though the person wearing it was trying to seize control of their own fate. But this mask is only one sign of Egypt's growing reliance on magic. During the Dark Age, Egyptians increasingly wrote curses and spells on pots and figurines. One such curse reads, "Die Henoi, son of interest." This was a form of magic small and personal enough to be practiced within the home. One of the most vivid methods involved taking a clay figure or a simple pot like this and writing the name of a person or a threat you wanted to dominate or stop. They often used red ochre, a color linked with destruction. So if I were performing this ritual, I might write down the things I wanted eliminated: early morning calls and alarm clocks. People from every walk of life practiced this. A priest might try to protect the pharaoh. A soldier might curse an enemy on the battlefield. Someone else might target a hated rival. Anyone could become the object of such rituals. To activate the curse, the pot was smashed. This act symbolically destroyed the enemy's name, and therefore the enemy themselves. And yes, that does feel oddly satisfying. Similar to voodoo, these practices appear in many ancient cultures, and Egypt was no exception. But this looks nothing like the formal, grand rituals led by the king at the head of the temple hierarchy. This is an Egypt growing more fearful, more suspicious, and increasingly aware of the dangers surrounding it: natural disasters, political collapse, and hostile foreign powers. This small wax figurine was a way to exert control over anyone who threatened the fragile balance of Egyptian life. Welcome to the Age of Fear, a period when every pillar of Egypt's worldview was shaking. Faith in the king, in the land, and even in the gods themselves had begun to fail. This marks one of the lowest moments in Egypt's long history, and its effects rippled throughout the Nile Valley. The king, traditionally based in the north, was no longer the source of wealth or stability. Royal officials abandoned the court and returned to their hometowns across the country. A united Egypt fractured, reverting to how it had existed 1,000 years earlier, split into local regions known as Nom East. And now a new type of ruler emerged to dominate the Dark Age. Not a single pharaoh, but multiple regional strongmen warlords. We know a great deal about one of them because he left behind a detailed autobiography carved into his rock-cut tomb at Moala, far from the usual tourist routes. His name was Ankhtifi. Ankhtifi began as a minor official and steadily climbed the ranks until he became a regional governor, or nomarch. As central authority collapsed, the power vacuum was filled by men like him. By Egyptian standards, Ankhtifi's tomb is modest, but its walls tell an extraordinary story of ambition and self-promotion. Egyptologist Gary Shaw is going to help me unpack it. You can see Ankhtifi himself, carved here standing proudly. He's depicted as a great man with an impressive hairstyle. And honestly, I already like him. The hieroglyphs and images on the walls reveal how Ankhtifi exploited the breakdown of royal power at the end of the Pyramid Age. The king is reduced to almost nothing, a mere afterthought. In fact, the pharaoh's name appears only once in the entire tomb, hidden inside a tiny cartouche. It couldn't be smaller, that's it. One fleeting mention in the whole monument. This says everything. Ankhtifi didn't need royal approval. He didn't need to claim he acted on the king's orders or through royal favor. He simply acted on his own authority. That single tiny cartouche captures the spirit of this entire era. Kings had been reduced to something insignificant, while local rulers towered in importance. Ankhtifi had elevated himself politically and wanted to leave no doubt, especially in the eyes of the gods, about his significance. The grand language once reserved exclusively for the pharaoh was now repurposed as part of Ankhtifi's own bold, self-glorifying propaganda. This warlord was a true egomaniac. He openly declared himself a hero without equal, a man with no rival, and you can see that obsession everywhere. I am a hero without peer. That phrase appears again and again, woven into nearly every inscription inside his tomb. So how did he justify such outrageous claims? By presenting himself as the great benefactor of the people. According to the texts, this was a time of drought and famine, and he cast himself as the man who guided the population through disaster. He claimed he managed the crisis, personally feeding the people, distributing aid, and performing acts of generosity. Bread for the hungry, ointment for those without it, sandals for the barefoot, even wives for men who had none. In other words, he painted a picture of total chaos only, so he could appear even greater as the one who rose above it. The worse he described conditions, the more heroic his role became. You see this clearly in his account of the entire South dying from hunger. Look at that hieroglyph. It's brutally graphic. A man collapsing. A corpse. There's no ambiguity there. He's dead. And then Enkhtifi pushes the story even further. He claims that every man was eating his own children. Cannibalism everywhere except, of course, in his own home. Where he ruled, everything was fine. Order prevailed. Because of him God at the same time, he boasts of being a mighty warrior. Right here, these inscriptions describe his military prowess. And then comes his boldest claim of all. Enkhtifi, the local strongman, almost elevates himself to divine status. I am the beginning and the end of mankind. None like me existed before, nor shall any exist again. During Egypt's Dark Age, warlords like Enkhtifi had effectively replaced the true kings. And his delusions of grandeur weren't limited to words. They were carved into stone and reinforced by his choice of burial place. He chose to be buried inside a rock, naturally shaped like a pyramid. He wanted to be a local pharaoh. And in a sense, he was, because whoever fed and defended the people was the one who ruled them. But as the power of warlords like Enkhtifi expanded, so did conflict between them. Over time, as they conquered rivals or forged alliances, two major dynasties of warlord kings emerged. One ruled in the north, wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt. The other ruled in the south, based at Thebes, symbolized by the white crown of Upper Egypt. Egypt became a divided land, two kingdoms split apart, with a brutal war zone between them. At the very heart of this fractured country lay Egypt's most sacred place, its earliest royal burial ground. Even today, it remains haunting and atmospheric. This was where Egypt's first kings were laid to rest, their mummified bodies buried deep beneath the desert floor in elaborate tombs. A place believed to safeguard their souls at least. That was the hope. But the conflict between North and South was about to sink to an entirely new level of horror. One act was so shocking, so blasphemous, that it permanently altered Egypt's relationship with its own past. Later texts describe it as a vile deed. Northern warlord kings, battling their southern rivals, desecrated these sacred royal tombs. Their troops set the tombs ablaze and destroyed the royal mummies in a single act. In that moment, Egypt's physical connection to its ancient past was severed. The outrage was immense. Such desecration was unthinkable. Although the northern rulers later expressed deep regret for what their soldiers had done, the damage could not be undone. The origins of Egypt's royal lineage were lost forever. Times like these rarely leave much behind for archaeologists to uncover. Destruction erases evidence. But if you know where to look, traces remain. Today, the most surprising remnants of this violation are thousands upon thousands of shattered pots scattered across the site. Most are not from the original destruction. Instead, they represent centuries of atonement. Not long after the desecration, this place became a site of pilgrimage. People traveled here carrying small pots filled with food, drink, and incense. They offered them to the souls of the dead kings once buried here. It was believed that these royal souls had united with Osiris, god of the dead. And as pilgrimage grew, it seems the people of Egypt were trying to make amends, repairing spiritually what had been destroyed physically. After the northern warlords erased the bodies of Egypt's ancient kings, spiritual memory was all that remained, and the outrage over this act soon sparked violent retaliation. Across the desert from Abydos lay Thebes, the stronghold of the southern warlords. They would soon rise against their northern enemies, determined to reunite Egypt as a single land. Around 2000 BC, Thebes was little more than a one-bounty town, but its rulers possessed two crucial advantages. First, they controlled a strategic bend in the Nile, a vital choke point surrounded by fertile farmland. Second, their local god was Montu, the god of war. The warlords of Thebes would ultimately reunify Egypt, and one man rose above all others. His image was carved into the walls of his Theban tomb complex, and even his name tells the story. This was the warlord Mentuhotep. His name itself reveals the moment in history. Mentuhotep means Montu is satisfied. Hotep means content, at peace. If the war god was pleased with Mentuhotep, then this man must have been a formidable military leader. And this scene says it all. Look closely, and you'll notice hands embracing him. Behind him, in front of him, around his body. He is physically surrounded by the gods. Most important among them is Montu himself. There he is face to face with the king, breathing life into him, filling him with divine power. This is the power of victory. And it was this power that finally brought Egypt's first dark age to an end. Mentuhotep lived up to his name. A true son of the war god, he marched his armies north, defeated his enemies, and reunited the land. And look, it wears the red crown of the north. He's making a statement. I may be a southerner. I may be from Thebes. I should be wearing the white crown. But look at me now. He wears the red crown and declares himself king of both north and south. Egypt is whole again. As the new ruler, he became Mentuhotep II. But reunification came at a terrible cost. The brutal reality of the war is recorded on the west bank of Thebes at Deir el-Bahri. In 1923, archaeologists uncovered the remains of Mentuhotep's warriors inside a tomb there. Their bodies are silent witnesses to a civil war fought 4,000 years ago. Around 60 bodies were found. These are the original excavation photographs. The desert climate had naturally mummified them: skin, hair, everything preserved. And crucially, their injuries remained. Some had arrows driven deep into their bodies. One pierced straight through the left side of the chest. Others were buried with leather wrist guards used by archers. 10 warriors were killed by ebony-tipped arrows. But some wounds are even more savage. Here, you can see where a man was struck violently on the head. The damage is graphic and unmistakable. After absorbing these ferocious blows, the survivors were left helpless on the battlefield. Vultures descended on their bodies. You can still see the terrible marks of that final indignity. It's an incredibly powerful image. The bodies themselves tell the story. You can see clear signs of the weapons used against them as they fought for control of Egypt. Arrows, sling stones, even rocks thrown down from higher ground had struck these warriors. After the fighting ended, their bodies were gathered from the battlefield and carefully wrapped in linen. That linen carried the mark of the Theban tomb complex belonging to their commander, Mentuhotep. But what matters just as much as the bodies is where Mentuhotep chose to lay his fallen men to rest. Today, their burial place is a sealed and little-known tomb. But 4,000 years ago, Mentuhotep honored these soldiers by burying them among the tombs of his highest officials. In death, they became part of his monument to victory. In doing so, the new king may have created the world's very first known war cemetery. I've been incredibly fortunate to receive special permission to see Mentuhotep's soldiers for myself. For the first time, the tomb wall is being taken down so I can come face to face with the men who fought in Egypt's civil war around 2000 BC. I'm genuinely excited. That same sense of curiosity once drove a team of American archaeologists to excavate the original mass grave. The bodies were later reburied in a nearby tomb and have scarcely seen daylight since their discovery more than 90 years ago. Now, this is frustrating, but for health and safety reasons, I can't go straight in. The tomb has been sealed for a long time, and stale air has built up inside. Fungal spores, bacteria, all kinds of hazards need time to disperse. Early Egyptologists often rushed in, risking their lives and feeding legends of the pharaoh's curse. So patience here really matters. It's hard to believe we're actually about to enter this tomb. Moments like this are extremely rare in an Egyptological career. This space is almost never visited. The wall has been removed, and no one knows exactly what lies inside. I've certainly never seen anything like this before. It's a truly extraordinary moment, and instantly, it's not at all what I expected. It's overwhelming. I've never stepped into a tomb quite like this. Wearing a mask is essential. The air is filled with particles, not just dust from centuries past, but dust from human remains themselves. This is a place that demands respect. It's a large rock-cut tomb, unfinished along the walls, typical of those made for courtiers and officials throughout these cliffs. A mummified body. It's absolutely astonishing. And if you look along the length of this long chamber, look at the floor. This isn't stone. It's human remains and mummy wrappings. Corridors and side chambers branch off, all filled with linen, layer upon layer of burial cloth, some believed to be the original wrappings used on Mentuhotep's fallen soldiers, meant to preserve them for eternity. First, it's difficult to understand what you're seeing. This tomb was reused many times over Egypt's long history. You can see parts of bodies, shoulders, skin folded and dried, soft tissue still intact in places. The impact is immediate. You're confronted with what a tomb truly represents. There's no escaping it. This is the realm of the dead, and we are standing among them. It's deeply emotional, an incredibly powerful space. What's striking is how little remains of their bodies. Like many tombs along the Nile, this one suffered centuries of looting and destruction. Among the scattered wrappings, debris, and human remains are the fragile traces of men who gave their lives trying to reunify Egypt under their leader, Mentuhotep. Walking back out of that tomb, I'm left with mixed emotions. I'm not entirely sure what I expected to find. Perhaps a few clearly identifiable soldiers. Maybe some were there. But in reality, what we're looking at is ancient Egyptians themselves. These people built the temples, the tombs, the pyramids. They created this extraordinary civilization. It's fascinating to study its grand ideas and symbolism, but in the end, it's these individuals who matter most. Mentuhotep's reunification of Egypt marked a fresh beginning, the start of what we call the Middle Kingdom. Thebes rose to prominence, becoming Egypt's new spiritual heart, a role it would hold for the next 2,000 years. During the previous century, Egypt's story had been dominated by Mentu, the god of war. But now, another deity stepped into the spotlight, Hathor, goddess of love, joy, beauty, and motherhood, one of Egypt's most ancient divine figures. Believing Hathor lived in the cliffs of Deir el-Bahri, Mentuhotep chose this site not only for his soldiers' cemetery, but for his own tomb complex as well. Here, where cliffs meet desert, he built in a place thought to be the very home of the goddess herself. It was a direct passage to the afterlife. For Mentuhotep and his men, who had lived and died in service to the war god, Mentu, they would now rest forever in the embrace of Hathor. Mentuhotep was the first to build at Deir el-Bahri, the founder of a reunited Egypt. His influence was so immense that nearly 600 years later, the female pharaoh Hatshepsut built her own funerary temple right beside his. She sought to draw power religious and political from his legacy. During the Middle Kingdom, life for ordinary Egyptians improved dramatically. Food supplies stabilized. Trade and wealth expanded. Agriculture was transformed through new irrigation systems. Yet the scars of the Dark Age remained etched into Egypt's collective memory, especially in how people prepared for the afterlife. In the Old Kingdom, tomb walls were filled with detailed scenes and texts depicting an idealized world. But after witnessing temples and tombs torn apart, people became cautious. Instead of lavish wall carvings, Many Middle Kingdom Egyptians chose smaller, more personal alternatives. They may look like children's toys, but these objects were made nearly 4,000 years ago, created specifically to be placed inside Egyptian burials. These wooden figures were meant to serve a very specific purpose: to guarantee the dead an endless supply of food and drink in the afterlife. What we're looking at here are the essentials of Egyptian daily life: bread, beer, and beef, everything needed to survive for eternity. At one end of the model, you can see the bakers at work. They're grinding grain into flour, which would then be shaped into loaves and baked over an open fire. The baker standing at the front has badly damaged arms, but from what we know from other examples, he was likely raising them to shield his face from the intense heat of the flames. Moving toward the center, we come to the butcher. He's in the middle of slaughtering an ox, cutting its throat while the animal's legs are tightly bound to hold it steady. It's a vivid and unflinching depiction of a task that was both routine and essential. At the far end is the brewer, and this section is particularly remarkable. He's forcing the mash through a sieve, and what's astonishing is that the sieve itself is clearly drawn and proportioned into the scene. The owner of this model clearly valued beer highly. This brewing section takes up almost half the total length, far more space than either the bread or the meat. You can even see the beer jars carefully arranged on their sides. It's an incredibly evocative object. These workers have been frozen in action for nearly 4,000 years, still going about their tasks as if no time has passed at all. The fundamental elements of Egyptian culture had returned, and they looked strikingly similar to the prosperous times of earlier centuries. Look at this next scene. A bustling group of men wrestling with sail poles, preparing to push a boat off the banks of the Nile. Nearby, inside a granary silo, workers haul sacks of barley while a scribe carefully records the harvest. Every detail emphasizes organization, labor, and control. There are also female figures represented here, which is important. In ancient Egypt, women enjoyed a status remarkably close to that of men, especially compared to women elsewhere in the ancient world. These women are engaged in producing another Egyptian essential: linen, the cloth used for nearly all Egyptian clothing. One standing woman is spinning thread with a spindle. Once she's finished, she passes the thread to her two companions, who are weaving it on a horizontal loom pegged directly into the ground. From this process come the bolts of fabric that would eventually be turned into wraparound dresses, kilts, and loincloth, clothing worn by almost every Egyptian, regardless of age or gender. The scenes depicted here are ordinary and familiar, showing a stable, comfortable life. They reflect the Egyptian idea of security and order. This isn't a golden death mask or a masterpiece meant to dazzle with luxury. That's not the point. These figures represent real people doing real work. This is ancient Egypt at a human level, up close and personal. Although order had been restored within Egypt, the anxieties that once tore the land apart hadn't vanished. Instead, those fears were redirected outward toward threats beyond Egypt's borders. Middle Kingdom rulers, such as Senusret III, focused heavily on defense and economic strength. Senusret III is well known for his brutal military campaigns into Nubia, a region rich in gold. But his strategy wasn't limited to warfare alone. He pursued long-term control through architecture by constructing a chain of massive fortresses. Here, you're looking at a map of southern Egypt and Nubia in what is now modern Sudan. Aswan marked the boundary between the two regions. Egypt secured its dominance over Nubia using a series of forts, around 8 of them, many built directly under Senusret's command. These Middle Kingdom fortresses were spaced within signaling distance of each other along the southern Nile, forming part of a vast state-sponsored construction program. Their purpose was clear: to dominate the local population and regulate the movement of people and goods into Egypt, especially Nubian gold. Very few of these forts still exist today, What you're seeing here are some of the final images ever captured of the largest fortress, Button. These were filmed in 1962 during excavations, just before the site was submerged following the construction of the Aswan Dam. The enormous mud brick walls vanished beneath the waters of what became Lake Nasser. But Bahan hasn't completely disappeared. Excavation records are preserved at the Egypt Exploration Society, and they reveal something extraordinary about Middle Kingdom Egypt. Alongside photographs, there are detailed architectural plans drawn during the digs, offering rare insight into the sheer scale of Egypt's military presence in Nubia. This aerial photograph shows the Nile running along the bottom edge. Rising from the desert sands beside, it is the square outline of Bahan's immense fortifications. As the excavations progressed, the full scope of the structure became clear, and it's startling. It looks uncannily like a medieval castle. Ancient Egypt isn't usually associated with castles, yet the evidence is undeniable. Bahan was designed purely for defense, meant to keep enemies out. Structurally, it shares many features with European castles, but it was built some 3,000 years earlier. Even more astonishing is its size. The scale on the map shows 100 meters. Just the wall facing the Nile stretches over 400 meters long. To put that into perspective, the Great Pyramid of Khufu measures about 200 meters on each side. This single wall alone is the length of 2 Great Pyramids. The total perimeter of the fortress exceeds a mile, and the outer walls stood around 11 meters high. Within those walls was enough space to fit roughly 20 football fields. Egypt wasn't just controlling resources, it was ruling through sheer, overwhelming intimidation. This was the Middle Kingdom's most powerful architectural statement, not pyramids, not grand ceremonial tombs. Those weren't the structures Egypt needed at this moment in its history. What they needed were massively fortified fortress town strongholds designed to protect the borders of their territory. When a fortress like this appeared in the harsh, empty desert landscape of the Middle Kingdom, it must have felt overwhelming. This wasn't a subtle presence. This was something enormous, intimidating, and unmistakably powerful, suddenly rising from the sand. For anyone traveling north from Nubia into Egypt, there was no avoiding it. You had to sail directly past this structure, and that journey alone would have taken a long time. Imagine what that must have felt like. You're in a small boat on the Nile, slowly drifting along, and you look up. And you keep looking up, higher and higher. The walls stretch above you, lined with arrow slits. You can't see who's behind them, but you know they're watching, maybe even practicing their aim on you. It's impossible to ignore the sensation that you're being observed every second. A kind of ancient Big Brother effect, where surveillance alone becomes a weapon. Rising directly from the Nile, Boyne stood as a brilliant symbol of authority. But more than anything else, it served as an early warning system, an outpost of vigilance for a state shaped by deep suspicion and lingering fear. And Egypt didn't stop there. The southern border wasn't the only frontier to be reinforced. The northeastern boundary, facing Palestine, was also heavily secured. This region saw constant traffic from foreign traders bringing goods into Egypt, one of the wealthiest societies of the ancient world. Monitoring who came and went was considered essential. One such visit is captured in a remarkable tomb wall scene. It shows a caravan of prosperous merchants traveling with their families. They're clearly not Egyptian, identifiable by their distinctive hairstyles and brightly colored clothing. These people were known as the Amu. They traded valuable items, including black galena, a crucial ingredient in Egyptian eye makeup. Their uniquely styled pottery has been discovered throughout the Nile Delta, where many of them eventually settled and lived among Egyptians. But within a century, some members of these Amu communities had risen through the ranks of administration. Eventually, they seized control of Egypt itself. These nomadic traders, who once passed peacefully through Egypt to conduct business, are shown here in this extraordinary tomb painting. Yet the most revealing detail isn't the figures. It's three small hieroglyphs placed right at the center of the scene. Together, they reveal another name the Egyptians used for the Amu. The symbols depict a crook or scepter, written with two signs, and pronounced Heka, meaning ruler. The third symbol represents undulating land desert or hill country, used by the Egyptians to signify foreign territory. Put together, the phrase means ruler of foreign lands. And that phrase offers a critical clue to what happened next. These Amu of Palestinian origin eventually became known as the Hyksos Heka Kosset, and from around 1650 to 1550 BC, the Hyksos ruled Egypt from the north. As tensions slowly grew between the foreign rulers and their Egyptian subjects, the country slipped into a second dark age. The Hyksos formed an alliance with the Nubians to the south, leaving the Egyptians effectively trapped between two hostile forces. We know relatively little about this troubled period, but a few extraordinary texts have survived. Among the most striking is a royal letter sent by the Hyksos king Apophis to Thebes. Its contents were so provocative that they helped ignite the drive to reclaim Egypt. The letter reads like either a staggering diplomatic blunder or a deliberate insult. At its heart is the Egyptian goddess Tauret, the fierce, blade-wielding hippopotamus deity. While Tauret was a protective figure, she was also terrifying, combining features of hippos and crocodiles, animals the Egyptians deeply feared. Apophis's letter is framed as a complaint. He claims that the sacred hippos in Thebes are so loud that they prevent him from sleeping. Expel the hippopotami from the lake, he demands. They do not allow me to sleep day or night because their noise is in my ear. Many scholars have dismissed this as an odd or absurd remark. But there's another interpretation. This may have been a veiled insult aimed at the powerful women of Thebes. Apophis appears to be likening the wife of the Theban ruler to the aggressive hippo goddess herself. Whatever the intention, the message had its effect. The Thebans decided the Hyksos had ruled long enough. They had to be removed. And what began as a war of words soon escalated into full-scale military conflict. Crucially, the Egyptians now possessed the means to fight back using technology, originally introduced by the Hyksos themselves, advanced weaponry. Most notably, a revolutionary new bow, the composite bow. At first glance, it might look similar to earlier Egyptian bows, carved from a single piece of wood. But the power of the composite bow came from its construction. It was made from multiple materials bonded together. A wooden core formed the center. On the inner curve of the bow, the belly animal horn was glued in place, creating immense spring tension. On the outer curve, sinew was added for strength, all covered in birch bark to protect it from the elements. Before the Hyksos occupation, Egyptian bows were large, rigid, and only effective at close range. The composite bow changed everything. Horn provided flexibility. Sinew added resilience. Together, they formed a devastatingly effective weapon. It was a brilliant combination, one that transformed Egyptian warfare and gave the Thebans the edge they needed in the struggle to reclaim their land. It almost invites you to try it, doesn't it? It really does. And it's incredible. There's a genuine feeling of strength behind it. It's not just effective, it's elegant. A beautifully engineered object. Let me show you why. This is what makes it such a revolution. The bow is compact enough to be used from a chariot, yet it delivers astonishing force. And wow, that shot was impressive. Nicely done. The composite bow was far easier to control and could fire arrows faster, farther, and with far greater precision. Faced with occupation, the Egyptians had no real option. They either adapted or remained under foreign rule. By adopting this new military technology, they eventually managed to drive the Hyksos out of Egypt entirely, forcing them back into Palestine and re-establishing control over Egypt's northern border. When the composite bow was combined with two other Hyksos innovations, the horse and the chariot, the result was devastating. Together, these three elements became powerful symbols of dominance, announcing the authority and supremacy of Egypt's new rulers. This moment marks the beginning of the new kingdom, ushered in by powerful leaders from Thebes, who now claimed the throne. This revival of royal strength was mirrored by the rise of Thebes' local god, Amun, whose cult center was based at the vast temple complex of Karnak. From this point on, Amun became the divine protector of Egypt and its kings. Yet shaped by the legacy of the Hyksos, these were a new kind of pharaoh. And carved into the walls of this very temple, the impact of the occupation is unmistakable. As the pharaoh is shown striking down his enemies, we see an Egypt reborn, a fully armed, fully energized superpower. Its kings, depicted on a colossal scale, are transformed into near-mythic figures, towering like superheroes. Across more than 800 years since the age of the pyramids, Egypt's history had been marked by turmoil, breakdown, and ultimately renewal. Now, the Egyptians had reclaimed their identity, their power, and their confidence, stepping into a genuine golden age. What follows is a new chapter in Egypt's story and era, defined by monumental building projects, astonishing wealth, and breathtaking ambition. But along with glory came excess, greed, and corruption. At Karnak, the priest kings had finally achieved what they had long sought: absolute power